First of all, thanks to the Detroit Institute of Arts for hosting these presentations. We'll have 4 more today. Hopefully you picked up a program out front that lists the schedule for today, but also it has a comment card inside there. So please, if you're interested in sharing your opinions about what you've witnessed today, or if you attend other presentations, it would be great to hear your opinions. But we'd like to thank all of our jurors that are up front sitting here. Some of them have flown in from afar. They will introduce themselves at the beginning of the Q&A session. Thanks to our steering committee. James Holloway from U of M's been here every day, so thank you. We also would love to thank our funders, William Davidson Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Herb Family Foundation, and we also would like to thank the Boston Consulting Group for all of their support of this project. So we have you now here for 90 minutes. I will be the facilitator, which basically means I'm the timekeeper. As I think many of you are aware, what we're here for is a job interview. We are interviewing 4 teams today that are trying to become the design team to lead the redesigning efforts of the exterior campus of the DIA, and then taking elements from that design to connect to all of the other arts and cultural institutions within this district. So it's a pretty big deal, and the timing of it couldn't be more important. Each team here today will have 45 minutes to present their qualifications, show their past work. I will give a 10-minute and a 5-minute reminder to them to let them know their times. Immediately after that, we'll have a 35-minute Q&A session. We are going to take questions from the jury first, then we will open it up to the audience. So we will move these microphones out into the aisleways. If you want to come and ask a question, please come up to the microphone and we'll fit you in. If we don't fit in all of the questions, again, you have your comment cards, or we can connect you with the appropriate people after the presentation if you want to talk further. So general housekeeping, if you could please turn off your cell phones or at least mute them, would be wonderful. We are live streaming this event on Facebook, and we're also videotaping it as well. We also ask, again, I know I've said it over and over, the comment cards are really important. We're sharing that with our jury members. You could possibly sway one of them, maybe, maybe not. But again, it's good to hear what you guys think about this. So then at the conclusion of this week, 3 teams will be selected to move on, and we will make an announcement in July about who those final 3 teams are. So I'm gonna pass the stage over now to Mekong Kim Design, and they're gonna come up and present their team members and their qualifications.
Can everybody hear me in the back? Great. Okay. I'm Mikyoung, and we're just so pleased to be here. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to come here and share our work with you guys. Let's see, just make sure the technology is working. So I'm a landscape architect, urban designer, and artist, and our firm is about kind of inhabiting the space in between the kind of conventional professions. I have Brian Cho here, who's part of my office and design leader, and he'll be joining us during the question and answer period. We have some team members here, and I'd like to introduce them. Jamie Carpenter, who is our partner in, I was going to say partner in crime. Oh my gosh. We broke no laws in the last 24 hours. I've known Jamie for, gosh, maybe 12, 13 years. And when we started thinking about this project, I've just always admired his work and just really enjoyed, I think that his interest in transparency and light, I think, is really appropriate for this project. So Jamie Carpenter will be our primary design partner. Jamie introduced us to Quinn Evans, and I think we both agreed that Kemba at Quinn Evans and Liz Nibby, who is in the audience over there, are important partners to help us both. They're a fantastic architecture firm here in Detroit, but also have a deep understanding of the kind of history of this place. So we felt like that's an important complement to our team. And then they introduced us to Sarita Scott, who is part of CDAD, and they would be our partner in kind of overseeing the community engagement process and kind of being allowing for our team to be a bridge to the community. So that's very important to us. The slides you see behind us, I think, show the ethos of the making that Jamie and I share. We are really interested in the space in between things. So for Jamie, it's like between architecture and art and the urban realm, and for us, it's landscape, art, and the urban design piece of things. I think for us, when we started reading this RFQ, we just got very excited because we felt like the RFQ asked a lot of the questions that we ask every day when we do the work that we're doing right now. And I think we'll be sharing a few of those projects, but these questions are big questions. They're open-ended questions. What does it mean to create a kind of cultural destination in the city in the 21st century? I mean, that's a big question. And that's something that we address all the time. But I think here in Detroit, here at DIA and the Midtown District, it's another question, which is how do we address the kind of historic foundation and yet look forward and say, how can this place be a platform for civic engagement, a place that's inclusive, a place that's diverse, a place that's young and old and kind of incorporates many different kinds of minds. And so that's what is a democratic platform and how do we create a neighborhood? So those are all questions that we ask, and we start by really listening. I mean, today we're gonna do a lot of talking, but our process is really about listening and understanding that community. So the slides you see behind you, the images are both CDAD's and our images about our process. We work at many different scales. And there was a question that was sent to us, which is, when do we know the community process has been completed? And Jamie said, it's never done. And so what you see in these images are us working through that process. When we finished when we found out that we were shortlisted, we were like, yay! And then we decided we'd come together and meet and talk about the project. So these are some images of us on site. We spent the day collaborating, doing a charrette, walking the site. Jamie and I know each other, but we got to know Kemba and Sarita a little bit better. This is our team. This is our core team. And so we have left these booklets in front of you, and you can see the full team. I won't go through the full team right now, but I'm happy to answer questions about them. There's a core design team that includes 2 other design firms that are not here today, but we can speak on their behalf, that also kind of inhabit the boundaries between things. That's where we think innovation happens. We have a community engagement team that includes technology component and then engineers. So when we met, we were like, what are the 3 big ideas? And these ideas look really simple, but it took us a long time to get here. It's really about, our work is really about connecting people. And it's kind of breaking down barriers, and I think that's what creates communities. So it's bringing people together, retaining people within the community, drawing new people in. But as I said before, it begins with listening. Really understanding. And so for us, we are a team that's about kind of finding that moment of empathy as designers, engaging not just taking in information to kind of put data into a map, but really learning about people and understanding what that story is. So I wanted to show 2 case studies that I think are relevant to this project in Detroit. One is in the center of Seoul. It is the revitalization of a city center, but it's also, so you can see, pardon my back, that this is the 7 Mile River Corridor. It is situated in South Korea. Korea's in the news a great deal these days. And this is the site that if it is successful, the 2 countries come together, they will actually celebrate the reunification at the source point that we designed. I won't go into the detail of the design itself, but I just want to walk you through a little bit of our process. The project itself has a lot of history, and we had a historical expert who helped us kind of understand that. This project began, it was a river that was highly contaminated. I'm running through thousands of years of history here. Highly contaminated in the 60s and 70s, covered with a highway. And so this amenity, which joined the city together, became a divider, and it divided the city for about 40 years. So I think this is an appropriate project that's parallel in that our job was to, in this very large infrastructure project, was to break down this barrier and really create new connections. So you can see these kind of arrows that move across and ways in which we could make that a more pedestrian experience and bring history. So these are utilizing kind of historical, some of them are refurbishing, and some of them are rebuilding these bridges. So this is a tapestry of the social, kind of creating an urban destination, and then creating a platform for programming. There's a lot of programming here. From season to season. There's an important environmental component which talks about biodiversity, and really, I think, integrating this environmental component allows for it to become a more humane space for people to inhabit. And then all of this leads up to urban renewal. Again, it's about both retaining people within the city and also drawing new people in, tourists, community members, and people within the region. But this is what it's about. It's about bringing 2 people to the river. And this is the story we try to find in every project that we do. What is that story of this community? This took us a year to figure out. What is this story? It's about a mother and child seeing a crane in the river. The slide on the right is the resiliency slide. So this entire sunken waterway holds 750,000 tons of stormwater at its peak. It's a glorified bathtub. There's the everyday. It becomes an urban beach. At night, it kind of lights up. There are 9 source points that represent the 2 countries. And so when I imagine when there's a celebration, these lights will turn many different colors. Arts programming that really draw people in. And then just how can we make it a place that's successful for 2 kids coming to the river on the everyday, and yet be a place where 1 million people can come and celebrate the winning of some soccer game or state their kind of democratic voice. This is a project we're in the midst of now, but we felt like it's very similar in its planning, so we want to show the other end of the spectrum. It's the Huntington Avenue of the Arts in downtown Boston, and you can see that it's got some major kind of anchors, arts anchors. The Museum of Fine Arts is about 20 to 30 years earlier than the Detroit Institute of Art, but it has some of the same issues: front door, back door, where do you park? And so the city felt that this avenue of the arts was disconnected. So our charge was, how do we reconnect it? It's got some very important anchors. And so wanted to show how we begin our mapping process. That's the avenue of the arts. Here are the major anchors of this area. There's Isabella Stewart Gardner. There's Symphony Hall. Symphony Hall, again, was built at around the same time, turn of the century. And just looking at the disconnections of bike paths and how we can reconnect them, ways in which people enter the city from kind of the regional area, and how can we make this a cultural destination for downtown Boston. So what we found was there are a lot of good bones, and that's how we try to start. It's like, what's the positive? What's great about? And I'd say there are parallels to Detroit here as well. A lot of good bones here, a lot of good stuff happening inside the buildings. And so what we try to eventually create are what those pink lines are, is what's that network and how can we enliven this space? So you can see in this diagram, this area here is really the missing teeth. And so we started working with Northeastern University. So this area has all the components of DIA. It has great museums, it has some performance arts centers, it has a medical center, and it also has great educational facilities, NEC, Northeastern, Wentworth. And so with Northeastern, they then came on board, and we worked with Northeastern and NEC and Symphony Hall and the MFA to make these outdoor spaces places where there are circulating outdoor galleries, there are performances. And so our design began with studying what the Avenue of the Arts is. Simple diagram, when you walk down, so when you see, this is where the museum is, and this is where Symphony Hall is. It's really a wall, and all of the buildings are very opaque. There's very few windows. There are a lot of fences, and it really says keep out. And so our big strategy was to kind of open things up and really let the city bleed into the campus. And we worked on a streetscape master plan. They also have their T station. Their T actually goes in the middle of the street rather than the queue line on both sides, as it does on DAA. And so this is a rendering of the first phase. That's actually, we're in design development of this project right now, and it shows a kind of central amphitheater that at night can become enlivened with programming and activity. There could be student concerts from NEC on the Northeastern campus. And so we created an amphitheater that can hold 300 people within it in the exterior. We've also integrated stormwater management, so these are rain gardens into this campus. The resiliency is always a layer in our work. And I just want to close with just some eye candy, which is we've done over 24 urban destinations all across the world, so we know how to do this. I think in each project we're trying to figure out who are you, what's your story, and how can that allow for us to be inspired to make kind of very unique and site-specific engagements. Each place asks a different question, and we try to innovate with materials, so we don't do the same thing for each project. Different projects have different constituencies and different climates, and so they offer challenges that really excite us. But in the end, it's those two kids coming to the water. It's about bringing people together. So I wanted to have Jamie talk about a few of his projects, and so I'll pass the mic over to him.
Great. I have this operational. Thank you very much. Mikyoung didn't explain that we actually both went to the Rhode Island School of Design. So the culture there is very much of a making culture. And I started in architecture and basically became enamored by working with materials more directly. And basically my practice deals with light in many, many different ways, but light as a way of opening up and creating sort of collective spaces, both external in the landscape and also within built environments. But this particular project we chose because it does have some parallels to the conditions here. This is the Olmsted Park done in 1871 called the Plaisance in Chicago, connecting the lake with Jackson Park. And the parallels here are obviously the University of Chicago to the north, which is on your left, and the Oak Park community and Woodlawn communities. And to the south, you actually have a portion of the campus that had been underdeveloped, but most importantly, it has the South Side community, which is a very underserved community that the university was hoping to interconnect more directly with through the emphasis on this project. So this original diagram that we've overlaid a few lines on was really Olmsted's idea to have it become a canal or a lagoon, basically, that would set up an artificial water body, which in retrospect would have been a further division between these two communities. And our approach when arriving here, this piece of land, even though it's an Olmsted park, he somewhat disowned it because he was not involved in the actual execution of it, was very much of a no man's land between the campus. The campus really stopped on one side. There was always a bit of trepidation about going into the park evenings, and had a long history of being a place to avoid, actually. So the condition was really in the center of the campus, or the center between these two communities, was a place that nobody really wanted to use or go to. And our goal in this project is really to take that notion of a void and basically turn it on its head and make it into a center between the schools. So what we did is we took 4 of the major roadways that run through the site, and on those roadways designed a series of bridges that actually link back into Oak Lawn and Woodlawn, Oak Park and Woodlawn communities, and then extend further into the south side. So in terms of community engagement, this was literally every agency in New York, from parks to Department of Transportation to all of the various political organizations and aldermen, both south side and around the university, to get coherence and sort of embracement of this idea. And then ultimately the work is both done with light. These are light towers that we sort of developed that essentially extend the street wall. So it extends the street wall from the north down to the south, widening the sidewalks, introducing a limited amount of landscape, expanding the center of the roadway so that it has a place for students to gather and meet as they cross the area, or if individuals are moving from the south side into the community around the university. It is a place where they meet and now actually utilize that space for more active intramural sports. And they become basically the observation places for students to watch what's going on in there. So what Mikyoung mentioned is that what we share in terms of studios is as an artist, essentially, which is my practice, we really bound architecture and engineering and fine arts. And a lot of the work has to do with development of ideas specific to a project. So the development of these light masts done with a company in Minnesota that does mining equipment, working with them over a series of years to come up with these elements, and then the university progressively implementing these year by year. And there's currently now 3 of these bridges assembled, but it becomes very much of a gathering place as opposed to its original situation. On other projects, I mean, this is, I have a very long career in the sense that I first working as an artist very intensively through the 70s, showing mostly in Europe and New York, and then realizing I wanted to come back into architecture. I basically brought my understanding of glass as a material to architects and began working immediately with people like with I.M. Pei on the Louvre Pyramid and Norman Foster on a building in Hong Kong. And I realized there was an opportunity for me to re-enter the profession as an artist, basically bringing another understanding of how to work with glass. So we're often parts of very big teams, very complex teams dealing with infrastructure and urban environments. So this was a team led by Michael van Valkenburg, a very large team dealing with the city of St. Louis, basically taking the Saarinen and Dan Kiley designed landscape of the Gateway Arch project, and its execution in the 60s. Saarinen never actually saw it completed, and Kiley in many ways sort of disavowed his authorship of parts of it simply because it took so long. It was designed in the 40s, executed literally almost 20 years later. And it was, a lot of people looked at it as almost a monument to urban renewal. It basically replaced the original downtown St. Louis on the river with this new public park and access to the river. But as you can see in this slide, and I don't know what's marked here in red, basically the park had always been segregated from the city. It was 10 lanes of traffic to the west. You couldn't really comfortably get to the park without getting into a cab and being driven there. So we worked with Michael on many aspects of this at the beginning, as you always do in a competition, contributing where you can on all parts of it. But our primary focus on this project is the new construction and renovation of the museum. So what you see here is sort of the idea, which was really promoted by an incredibly positive citizens group in the city, covering the highway, linking the park to downtown St. Louis was the ultimate goal of the project. And this is also a City Beautiful example in the sense that this park extends further to the west into the city. A lot of work on the project. I can't overemphasize how much was done on the park to rejuvenate it, but our charge here, you're looking at the original condition, looking east towards the Mississippi River, a berm that Kylie developed, and how one might enter into a new space that all has to be built below ground because this is a listed landscape. So we could not change elevations of the landscape. We could remove them, but they had to be put back in the condition they were in. So the whole idea here is covering the highway, redo the entries. This is the original Sarnan entries, which were at the feet of the arch. Very unusual. You have a monument that has no center. You sort of enter it from either end. And they were very dark, and ramps were not accessible, and not a particularly comforting environment for anybody visiting the park. So this idea of connectivity, this is on a large scale landscape back into the city and creating this, covering the highway, and then this new space that's quite a bit of a surprise below ground. So it's about 60, 70,000 square feet of new construction and quite a large amount of reconstruction. But the new circulation pattern you can see there coming around this new entry. But the most important thing of the project as well is creating, by covering the highway, it creates a new civic space between a historic courthouse, rather infamous for the fact that it was where the Dred Scott case was conducted, and the new entry to the monument. So looking down before highway traffic separating it, looking down on the condition today, it opens in about 2 weeks. During construction, looking down at the Sarnan Museum below the arch, which was renovated, and then the new construction, and then gradually what took place, enormous amount of land removal and sort of uncovering a building that had been underground for 50 years. Everybody had 30 waste baskets in their offices, collecting rainwater. It was very shocking, actually, when you're there. But anyway, nonetheless, a great community support group to execute the project, and the team with Michael really focusing on how to make this all come together. So here you have that particular project. And then the most important thing, and I think relative to our situation here, is entry. How does one enter, and what is that space you're entering into when you break through? So this is all new construction, of course, but you're going underground. Visual connection back to the courthouse was critical. Light comes into the building over great distances. In fact, you get daylight about 100 yards down into the museum. So you walk in, and all of a sudden the groundscape opens up. You have a very generous and very interesting ceiling. The ceiling of this space is, in fact, a mirror image of the landscape above it. It's just basically following the landscape down to the arch. So just some thoughts about how that was done. And then I think something that Mikyoung and I have been talking about, and certainly a question that's come up in all of your early questions to us, is entry and threshold, and how one manages entering a building, a remarkably beautiful building by Paul Cray, and how you respect that type of a project and do something completely new and very engaging for public use. So a lot of our work is about thresholds, and we've been involved in many, many projects over the years. This is Moynihan Station. We did the winning competition design for the state and federal competition to grant the development rights of the site to some developers in New York. But what happened here is a McKim White building, 1928, nationally landmarked, totally impossible to know if it was open or closed or what was in there. We opened up the basically what were the original vents to the track lines down below that were covered up during World War II, put in new public spaces adjacent to it, new entries into the building, and most importantly, cutting through the building, taking out some floors and opening up these much larger spaces inside that create a very generous use of space. And how you touch a building, like several of the buildings we're talking about, are landmarked and are very, you have to treat them very carefully, and adding this new entry to it. Other projects, and we do work, about half of our work is sort of out of the country. This is the German Foreign Ministry in Berlin. Again, the public space in a very cold climate, a climate that doesn't have much daylight in the winter, and the whole space is designed to gather more light from a low angle and bring it into the public space. It becomes a very public amenity to the Foreign Ministry. And then one last project, which is the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, a very comprehensive project over about 20 acres. Again, historic buildings from the 60s. Concrete buildings, you didn't, again, know if they were open or closed, or if the museum was open. Very confusing in terms of circulation, and going through the whole campus, adding new buildings and tearing down some old buildings to create a very open vocabulary of new buildings. And I think that's somewhat what we're in the back of our minds thinking of here, a vocabulary of materials and spaces that will thread together a commonality between these different sites. And this is both day and night. You know the buildings are open. And it's a very subtle thing. We actually do things that are, we're not trying to brand something in our work. We're not trying to create something that's differentiating itself to the extent of standing out and diminishing the value of what you have as an asset, but how you support those qualities of buildings and actually make them much more accessible, inviting, and usable. So I would like to introduce our partner, Quinn Evans, who we worked together with on a project that Kimba will talk about in a moment, Kimba Brayton. But I would like to say we also coincidentally worked together on the Arch project, and Quinn Evans was in charge of the renovation of the federal courthouse. So we discovered that in the process of doing the project that Kimba's going to speak about.
Thank you, Jamie. Okay, so good morning. My name is Kimba Brayton, and I've spent most of my career working as an architect and a historic preservationist right here in the city of Detroit. Prior to joining Quinn Evans, I was on staff with the city of Detroit as a historic preservationist, and one of my jobs involved working with cultural organizations such as the Belle Isle Conservancy, the Ford Paquette Plant, and the Scarab Club to help them come up with strategies for repairing their historic buildings. So when I joined Quinn Evans, I brought many of these important relationships with me, as well as a real understanding of the city, how it works, and how to get things done. So at Quinn Evans, we've successfully completed about 70 projects throughout the city of Detroit. Many of them are based right here in Midtown in the Cultural Center. And even more importantly, I think, than the projects, are the relationships that we've developed with the community and the city, as well as a real unique understanding of what makes Detroit so special. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the relationships we've fostered over the years and the fantastic projects that have come about as a result. So as Jamie mentioned, just recently we teamed up together to work on the glass gallery at Henry Ford's Greenfield Village. So Henry Ford was one of our long-term clients, and this project involved transforming an old machine shop into an exciting new exhibit space. So with Jamie's guidance, we did a beautiful glass vestibule that kind of incorporated the existing entry of the building and intersected the existing machine shop building. It was really a beautiful marriage of the old and the new. So I'd like to speak a little bit about the Scarab Club. A few years ago, back in 2014, I received a call from the executive director, and she was really concerned that the building needed some repairs to help maintain the integrity of its beautiful interior space. So we met at the Scarab Club, and I was just amazed at this jewel of a building tucked away behind the DIA. Of particular concern, in light of the water that was pouring through the roof, were the exposed ceiling beams on the second floor lounge, where prominent artists had added their signatures. The first was Diego Rivera when he came in 1932 to work on his Detroit industrial murals here at the DIA. And since that time, the proud tradition had continued with Norman Rockwell and many other prominent artists adding their signatures to the beams. So I worked closely with the Scarab Club. We developed a strategy to repair the roof. I wrote a grant that was funded, and I managed the project from start to finish. But my relationship with the Scarab Club didn't end when the roof was repaired. So they invited me to join the board as a board of directors with the Scarab Club, and I gladly accepted. I stayed on for many years and just helped the club through its rebranding efforts. So the Scarab Club is Michigan's oldest fully functioning art association, and part of their rebranding was looking for ways to bring in new, younger art enthusiasts, and so I helped them with that effort. So in addition to working to help revitalize Midtown and the downtown and the cultural center, we've been really pleased to be involved in the neighborhood revitalization efforts taking place in Detroit's residential districts. The first was Island View Greater Villages, and right now we are currently working on Jefferson Chalmers. And with that relationship of working with the community and the city, I got to know Sarita with CDAD. And I would like to say that I've been really impressed with her ability to engage the residents in Detroit and inspire them to become part of the change that they'd like to see in this fantastic city. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sarita.
Thank you. Good morning. As a Detroiter, I am really pleased to be a part of this team. I'm excited about a project to enhance this particular space that's so dear to me. My family and I spent a number of hours in the project area, from STEMinista events at the Science Center, to Friday nights here at the DIA, to serving as a vendor in the rotunda at the Charles H. Wright during Noel night. This is a very special place, and so it is a privilege for me to be here, and thank you. As the community engagement partner, CDAD will utilize our unique placement as a citywide membership organization. And so we're a membership organization of other groups. That is part of the strength of our engagement, because it's not just our small team, it's really our partners just throughout the city and the region. Part of our work, as Kimba mentioned, our planning experience working on Jeff Chalmers. We have conducted a number of our own community planning experiences across the city in the Brightmoor neighborhood, Chad Condon, Cody Rouge. Oh, thank you. I'm so used to practicing the slide. Thank you. These are all neighborhoods across the city that have some of the most diverse populations. And we've worked there on quality of life planning that really engages large populations of the city. We've also done placemaking projects throughout the city.
10 minutes left.
Providing grants that incorporate arts and community planning to really ensure that we are activating public spaces for everyone. These photos are just some examples of the different tactics that we utilize, recognizing the various and diverse stakeholders that will be affiliated with this project. And so things from utilizing interactive surveying that gives people the opportunity to move around and engage with others, one-on-one interviews that really allow for more detailed engagement and data collection, large group meetings that also incorporate activities that can have elements of art and other creative aspects. and then intergenerational and cultural exchanges that also have the opportunity to build relationships. And so we recognize that relationships are extremely important. Another piece of our work is really building on existing expertise and work that's already happened. And so we know that there are a number of partners who are already involved in community engagement. We've worked closely with the City of Detroit Department of Neighborhood and the district managers who work throughout the city and also engage residents. And so through these partnerships and our work, our past work, we will really help to facilitate a robust community engagement process that's inclusive and works to create a vibrant public space for everyone. I'm going to turn it back over to Mikyoung, and she'll talk a little bit more of some of the specifics that were learned from our visit.
Thank you. Thank you. We wanted to take, we have 8 minutes, 5 minutes?
Yeah.
The last few minutes and just share with you our initial kind of take on the site and the way in which we might, if we were to move into the next phase. We don't know enough. I'm going to be very humble and say we don't know enough about this place to be doing this, but we felt it's necessary to, I think part of us, we were really excited. You saw us kind of drawing on the maps and these diagrams, and we just wanted to kind of show you how we would start, and obviously we would start with some of the things that Sarita had talked about with listening, but just looking at the downtown district, looking at its relationship to the region. We know that this isn't just about this small district. For us, it's a kind of much larger question. How do you bring people in? How do you retain people within this area? I think there's a real similarity between the Avenue of the Arts here. You can see that there's a medical center, there's a core of really great cultural institutions. And we had this image in our head of, it's like the planning of this area right now is that each of these institutions have these, when we go to their websites, and when we were here and we went to the museum, there was like a blues concert on Sunday night. It was just, you go inside and there's just a lot of activity, and then you go back outside and it's as if you turned off the computer or something. It's like very quiet and there's no one walking on the street. And so we did a mapping of, you got great bones here. You don't need anything more in terms of content. When you see the pink lines here, it's as if each one of the institutions is like an island and it's its own entity. So I think one of the big elements, so you see these kind of black lines that we drew that kind of emerged in the diagram, and that was our reading of all the barriers that you have on the site that we would want, both in terms of landscape and architecture, to try to break down. Even a lawn's edge can be a barrier when it's formal, right? When it says, don't come on this lawn. So I know when we were there, we walked all the way around the edge, we didn't. And so, we were just thinking, what is that 5-minute walk? What is that 10-minute walk? Because I think those are good yardsticks to make a neighborhood. So we did something. It's a little bit of a risk, but we thought this is the kind of story we're looking for if we were fortunate enough to move forward. This is a family from out of town. They go and see the reflecting pool near the Yamasaki building, visit the sculpture garden, come back and maybe get a day pass, go and grab a cup of coffee with their kids. Their kids don't drink coffee, but, and then they go to the museum, they grab a bite to eat for lunch.
5 minutes.
Their kids are really active, and they go to the Science Museum. And then when they come back, there's an opportunity to really kind of bridge the library, the public library, and the museum through civic space. Maybe there are ways of kind of flanking that street and taking that formal lawn and transforming it. So another story is somebody who lives here, a millennial. Maybe they grab a cup of coffee in the morning. Maybe with the urban renewal, there's some new coffee shops that open up, new places to eat. as this kind of cultural district. They go to the library and then they walk over. Maybe you could close off the road adjacent to the African American Museum and really create a farmer's market or something more active at that corner. And then he comes back, sorry, she's wearing a skirt. She comes back and she comes to that same music festival and maybe meets that family that's there. Although these days, I guess you don't know. No judgment. So in closing, I mean, I think this is what we took a stab and at kind of showing you what we mean by the story. We're looking at both the strategic, which is we understand that there are 3 different counties that we need to reach out to, even though we know our region is within this district, that want to come, that we want to draw. But at the same time, we also want to know what that story is. And so, you know, that's, in the end, that's our spiel. We welcome any questions that you have.
So we're going to begin the Q&A session now, and we're going to start with
Yeah.
questions from the jury, and then we will open it up to questions to the audience. Okay.
And then what we'd like to do is bring the rest of our team up on the stage. We did take a peek yesterday, so we know you guys are going to ask some pretty detailed questions. So we wanted to make sure that we had the knowledge base on the stage. Why don't we just scooch over so we can all...
So we can introduce Brian.
Okay, so Brian Cho is our design leader in our office. He also attended the Rhode Island School of Design, so we've got 3 of us here. Scott, who is from Giffords-Webster, who was our civil engineer, and he's the one who told us there's 100 feet of clay below grade here in Detroit. It's a problem. And Liz, who I introduced earlier, and she's all about Detroit. So we're happy to take any questions.
I think before we start with the non-questions, it would be helpful for everybody to know who the jury is, so we're going to introduce ourselves.
Absolutely.
My name is Salvador Sabort, and I'm the director of the DIA.
Hi, I'm Rick Rogers, president of the College for Creative Studies.
I'm Juanita Muma, president of the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History.
I'm Julie Bardman. I'm founder and principal of Dirt Studio and professor of landscape architecture at University of Virginia.
Hi, I'm Maurice Cox, planning director for the city of Detroit.
Good morning, Kara McCarty, director of curatorial, Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum.
Mario Moore, artist from Detroit, but I live in Brooklyn.
Good morning, William Gilchrist, Director of Planning and Building, City of Oakland, California.
Hello team, I'm Jonathan Massey, Dean of the A. Alfred Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning at the Great University of Michigan.
Still great, that's right.
If you could see his shoes.
Right. So I just wanted to, I guess, start. I wanted to say that I really appreciate that you all took some time to actually walk around and kind of experience for yourself what the walk was like, rather than, you know, the digital landscape that you have seen before. So I really appreciate that. I think that was great. I do want to know, as far as the Boston project, how has it been, or is it, and as far as trying to make those connections between the institutions, and what has that experience been like?
Thank you. We didn't feel like we could come today without spending some time together. So not only do we come here, but I think Jamie called me like every other day. So I think at Northeastern, you know, us Bostonians were a little closed, and so it required the city of Boston participated in this project. It was a complex project to begin with, but they identified the problem, and then they said, and so our client emerged, the portion of the project that we're actually executing emerged after the planning process. Because it was the city of Boston who participated in this, and I think that all of these different institutions, the Symphony Hall, NEC, they're adjacencies, and the Museum of Fine Arts, they have adjacencies to Huntington Avenue, but none of them face Huntington Avenue. And a lot of them have, I mean, the Museum of Fine Arts is quite successful, but Symphony Hall, you know, they have a demographic that's aging, and NEC also is a very closed environment. And I think they all recognized the problem. And so for us, that was a godsend, because as they say in the therapy world, you know, if you don't know there's a problem, you can't solve it. I think that the Museum of Fine Arts was the last to come on board, but they recognized the problem because they've been trying to, like, they've added all these, similar to the DIA, they've added all these different entrances, and finally I think they've come back to fronting Huntington Avenue. And so it was a process. It took a year, and the president of Northeastern is a very vibrant man, and he's just really, he wanted his university to open up to the city, which was also a unique character for a university president. He said, I want musicians from NEC to come here and perform, and I want colorful lights on my quad, and it had to do with the identity that he wanted to make for his campus. So it was sort of the perfect kind of meeting of many minds, but it did take a process. And so I would credit, you know, our team in our office of spending many, many hours, many late evenings kind of listening and then really hearing, and then being a designer and saying, okay, I understand the problem you have. How about if we think about it in this way? Because there is a reason why there are territories. People feel like they want to protect them. But it was our job to show that by connecting people, you can actually make institutions stronger.
That was a really wonderful journey, and I too appreciated some of your observations about the cultural complex and how it operates. And I thought your point about if you don't know you have a problem, you can't solve it. What do you think our problem is? And what do you think, how do you think your team might be able to solve it?
Maurice, are you asking me personally? No, just go. That was a risk.
You're not on the couch. It's just, I do think, I mean, as extraordinary as this collection of institutions are,
right.
And it is pretty singular in the United States to have this cluster. So we know that's a good thing.
That's right.
But we know we have a problem.
Right.
Because on any given day, there might be thousands of people who are in those areas, but you don't see them when you're out there. So I'm just kind of curious, you know, I think we have a problem. I'd be curious what your observations are, but more importantly, what would you like to solve?
I'll speak about it maybe a little bit more from certainly public spaces outside the building, but also just the architecture and some of the confounding situations that you have relative to, and surprising actually when you come here to, you know, go to the African American Museum, the Wright Museum, which is quite an extraordinary collection. However, you then have a science museum next door where their loading dock and dumpsters are adjacent to the entry to the museum. There's just very untenable sort of situations there. They should be sort of clearly, so there are lots of tactical things that need to be done. Like, and also one of your questions to us is, how do I arrive by car, by bike, or pedestrian? I mean, you hate to start with the mundane, but what do you do with the cars, and how do you create these larger public venues? And then how do you connect them and give the population sort of agency to use those spaces? And I think that just something we talked about quite a lot is just cross-programming between the museums. And I know there's some of this going on with, I know you're a partner in this For Freedom project, 50 posters, 50 states, and you're partnering with Cranbrook and the University of Michigan MoCAD is partnering now with this El Cafe. I mean, how do you, I think that's one of the keys here. If you want to activate these spaces, and we have a parallel project happening right now, a museum in Denmark we're doing, a cultural history museum on an island, actually, which is about twice the size of Detroit. That cultural history museum has artifacts going back to Neolithic right through yesterday, basically. And the hope there is that you have the museum as a source, but then distributed within the communities and around the island are deeper bodies of information at the location where those events took place. It might be, again, like Neolithic grave, or it might be sort of Viking, sites, or it might be where the CIA had their listening post during the Cold War. I mean, all of these things happen on this island, or the Russians who took over the island after World War II. How do you bring about this richness of a history and distribute it so it's actually activating a community at a smaller scale, triggering an interest in that subject and bringing it back? And you could see programs that link the Historical Society with the DIA, with your museum as well. How do you have these mutual lines of interests, and how do they reach out both locally and maybe regionally, and maybe go touch our former friends across the river, in Canada, right? I mean, it's another likely, there's a big population over there that would be wonderful to, engage as well. I haven't really seen, I'm partially from Quebec, so I think about Detroit more from the point of view of, day one when the city was founded by French Canadians. But.
Yeah, but I think the good news is that it's not like a lot of other cities we've worked in where there's no space. I think you're not utilizing the space effectively around the buildings, so it's like the void. So we always, when we're arguing with architects, we say, when I can see the sky, that's, you have to let us speak. And so whenever in this place, I see the sky a lot, but I think that it's just underutilized, and it's, I think, based on both the kind of Beaux-Arts architecture. So that's the question that I asked earlier, which is, that's a kind of formal language, and it's I think maybe more Eurocentric as well. And so how do we transform that? And then also, I know that the whole area is based on a kind of the City Beautiful idea, again, about kind of visualizing and viewing things from a distance. Whereas, what does it mean to engage something today? It's you roll in it, you touch it, it's a fully engaged experience. And so I think that the good news is you have the space, and it's just kind of really rethinking things and trying to, on one hand, I think, be respectful for these treasures of architecture that you have, but also using this kind of connective tissue to more effectively connect people to each other, create civic spaces that, I think, creating kind of ground plane that has the capacity to be flexible. So it can be more formal when you need it to be, but you can bring 100,000 people there if you need. And so when you do that with a civic space, I think there's a kind of resonance that happens. It's like the parking lot that becomes, on the weekends, a urban fair and a food truck place. I know when I drive by it, I remember, even though I see cars parked there the next day, I remember that something else can happen there. And so it's that layering of richness, I think, that you need as well.
If I may. First of all, I want to commend you for working through your trepidation about looking at scenarios as to how you might approach this. I thought that was very good, actually. And I want to get back to the beginning of the presentation when you answered one of our questions concerning community engagement and how that ripens through a process. And your answer, I think, was philosophically grounded, but a little loaded as well, where it never ends was your answer. Right. I'd like you to, okay, well that's what I'm getting to. I'd like you to unpack that a little bit as it relates to your design process, because just by its nature, you take programming through schematic, through design development, through contract documents, there's a decreasing flexibility one has to respond to input through those phases of production. But there's still, I could see, a way of engaging community even as you ripen those concepts and move them towards implementation. I'd like to understand what your thinking is if the community process goes through your whole engagement. What does that look like? How does that change along with your production process?
Okay, great question. There are two kind of projects we're working on right now that I wanted to just briefly touch on because I think it'll help rather than talking in the abstract.
Thank you.
The first.
We like that.
Okay, good. I mean, we can think in the abstract, and we. I think about it like I'll start abstract. I think about it like child rearing, which is like you get a book, right, and it has these kind of steps, and it says by year 1, your child should have achieved this, and as a parent, and really the community process starts like that for us, and we would be organizing that, so it helps the community to have a structure. It doesn't help them to say it's just going to go on endlessly, or we're going to meet you every other day, but we need to kind of create a structure for them. And then that structure, like parenting, shifts because each community is different. And so to get to know, each child is different. You cannot follow Dr. Spock and know that each child is, and know that that's a successful process. And so I would say there are 2 projects that Brian and I are both working on. One is it's the Lumpkin Jail. They have yet to actually come up with a title. It's in Richmond, Virginia. And it is the site where they uncovered the archives for the largest facility where they imprisoned and sold African slaves. So it is a hotbed topic. And we worked on this project. We've been working on it now for a year and a half, just listening. And we have just started that process of designing. And so through that process, Sarita talked about there are many different scales of engagement. That is so important. And we don't just sit here at this table in this auditorium and do this. We sometimes sit here and at this table and do an engagement. We go to the community and we talk to them. We do open forums. In this project, I think we would do it through the lens of art. We would try to reach out to local artists who kind of are, again, hybrid people, and they kind of, they both use art as a way of connecting with the community. And we've actually reached out to a few people here in Detroit, and we haven't put them in our team yet, but we think that would be a very effective way of working. Now you asked, how do you continue to go through? And in our healthcare projects, we do a lot of healing gardens, and in those projects, we start off by talking with, again, it's as powerful as seeing the great-grandchild of a slave owner and a great-grandchild of a slave come together and talk to each other. And that's one thing that we did at the Lumpkin Jail Project. How do we bring people together through the community process? In pediatric hospitals, there are these families where coming to that institution is the worst day of their life. And so our process, it's like the community process is not just about them healing by expressing their experience with us, but us being inspired and moved by their work. And so in that project, we would very early on, because it was basically a lot of non-designers, we would make physical models, and we would, so you saw that in some of the slides. Sometimes with 3 or 4 kids, we would talk to them about what we were proposing. And then as we were going through, what we created with them was an advisory group. And there were 3 different scales of the advisory group. There was a parent advisory group, and then the kids wanted to be separated from their parents because they couldn't get a word in edgewise. And so we kind of created all these representatives. And then we would make physical models, because I found that actually even those perspective renderings, those beautiful perspective renderings you see a lot of designers make, they didn't understand it. And it also doesn't express the experience because it's a fixed point of view. The human eye sees 3,000 images in 1 minute. And so to pick, and I'll give away something, one perspective is the perspective we pick because it's the best view, and so what we try to do is make these models where you can pull things off and you can move things around and you can discuss them and people understand them better. And then as we move through the process, we share construction documents with and say, here's a detail we're thinking about of how we're, so in Chicago, we did a healing garden, and we showed some design development drawings. And then the client and the family advisory group introduced us to an urban forester. And that urban forester then found us wood that was planted by Frederick Law Olmsted during the Columbian Exposition. And then you saw a picture of me walking in front of these really jacked guys with this large logs. That's us being really excited because that's wood with history and resonance. And so what we did was, from there, then a parent said, what if you kind of found a way to engage kids in this process? So we cast kids' hands, and that's a picture you saw as well. So community process isn't just talking. It's about finding meaning and finding ways in which literally their hands are in this garden. And there's a sensor within those hands that emit the sound of water. So another kid touches those hands, and sounds of water come out of the wood. When we made mock-ups, you saw pictures of that as well. We invited the same group that we talked to at the very beginning, and they'd grown up, it'd been 5 years later, to kind of see the mock-up and talk to us. And so at each phase, we bring something different to the table, and they share with us what they think. And so it's basically a conversation.
Thank you.
So I have what I would call a project management question. Okay. With many parts, which I'll probably forget half of. So thank you for providing this booklet. Thank you for your diagram of the partners. I would compliment you that you've really thought, it seems like you've touched on every possible aspect of this project, and you have a firm or a partner who's going to work on that. But it's also a really, really large team. Some of you have worked together before, it sounds like. Some of you have not. So first of all, I'm curious, how are you going to manage this project? Secondly, I'd be really interested in hearing a little more about the relationship between what are clearly the two lead firms, your two, because how are you going to distinguish between landscape architecture and urban design? I mean, Jamie, yours is listed as the urban design input, although the work you showed looked like architecture to me. But I'd be interested in that distinction. And then could you also talk about the sustainability aspects of the project? And there are other partners down here that you haven't mentioned. So
yes, absolutely.
Sorry for the
no problem.
Complexity of the question.
I'm glad you asked the question because it gives. We had 45 minutes and we didn't want to spend it on this, but we did put a team together. So our office, over the last 23 years, has done this many times. And what I mean by this is that we, whether it's Tangiers, Morocco, it's Boston, Massachusetts, which is our home base, it's Chicago, Illinois, we come in and we try to really listen. But we put together a team and we lead that team. So I think we're great listeners even with the kind of collaborative teams that we put together, and we meet them and we try to get to know the people we're working with. And it's usually not hard because it is like I was thinking this is like the 6 separations to, to Kevin Bacon, right? I mean, Kevin Bacon's not on our team, but we just, I reached out to Jamie. So I reached out to Jamie. Jamie then connected us with Kemba and Liz, and so on and so forth. So I think we have a lot of experience kind of making a family and making a collaborative. There's one, you want to answer?
I should just answer one thing. In terms of the environmental component, the engineering component, the engineers are called Schleich-Bergman and Partners. We've worked together with them for 40 years. Oh, okay. And the environmental engineers are probably the best in the world, called Trans Solar Engineering, and we've worked with them since day one, since they started, 30 years. But, so we have a long, long history working all over the world on different projects, different university projects, different museum projects. And
so
similarly, this
that's right.
Here.
So although, wow, that just got a lot louder. Although we will be the contact, the prime We are not a firm where I do a sketch and pass it down to somebody else and they scan it and draw it. We are a collaborative firm. People throw that word around, but it actually means something to us. It's a kind of discussion that we have with each other. And so I think that you asked, how do you divide up are we gonna fight with each other, right? You know, will he wanna do the landscape and I'll wanna do, you know? And I think the way that you outlined it is very clear, right? That there are gonna be architectural components. And that is why we brought Jamie in, is we just thought there are some issues with your buildings and that I think Jamie has the expertise to really address. I also think that there are discussions that we will have as friends, as colleagues, about what the overall vision will be. And it sounds messier than I think it will be.
And I guess you're sort of touching on a point that we run up against often, is that people really want to have a clear definition of each individual's role. And I think our practices mirror one another in the sense that we are broad-based, and we're in fact underlying the foundation of the offices is breaking down those barriers and being able to work much more fluidly between them. So.
But we have inserted our full team in the booklet, so you will see they're not here today, but we have a seasoned team who'd be able to work on this project all the way through execution. So I think I've answered. Yeah, perfect.
At this point, we should ask if anyone from the audience has a question that they would like to ask. Come on up, please.
Hi, you've used all the right words, you know. You've touched a lot of bases, you've hit a lot of important points. But I wonder how you intend to manage the listening and hearing, essentially the responsive aspects of engaging, and inspiring, which is a leading thing. So it's this balancing of being passive and leading. How do you propose to balance that?
Thank you. I'm going to have Sarita answer this question, but I think for us, we need to do that. You know, it's not something we do because it's required of us. We need to do that. You see that our projects, from project to project, place to place, looks different. And that's not us, that's the people. We don't start off with a blank canvas. We start off by really listening and learning.
So that's really our role as part of the team. And so while we have a love and appreciation for art and design, that's not what we do. We're actually an advocacy organization, and our sole role and point of being here is to ensure that there is a really inclusive process that does listen. And so even though Mikyoung responded to the comment about engagement, that's the same way we view engagement. It's a relationship. It is not we're here, we're presenting some information to you, you know, thanks for coming. It's about building relationships and listening. And I'm a Detroiter. I feel I have a stake in this. And people people know me. So they hold my feet to the fire. But it is not we want to come out. People want to know that what they have said is being interpreted and incorporated and a part of the design, and we're hearing it. And how this is a very unique time for Detroit. I take it very seriously, and we want to capitalize on it. This is a unique space. It can be used as a model for how we bridge, the city, the region, the counties, the various other cities, and also how we present ourselves nationally into the world. And so it's going to be extremely important that the listening happen, because this is also Detroit. People will let you know if they feel like we haven't done it well.
We're very opinionated.
I would like to put a finer point on the gentleman's comment, because this is a competition.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And competitions, people gather information, they go away, they work their magic, they come back, test if they're hit the mark. So I'm curious, how are you going to, in your competition process, get to the hundreds of artists in this community who have a stake in this, the larger Detroit community who are not artists, but who claim this as their space, to people in the region. Now, part of this is on us. We have to help set that table.
Thank you.
But we will absolutely help. But I think that you have to be able to bring a unique set of tools to the table that we didn't give you, because so I'm just trying to understand what that looks like in very concrete, specific terms.
Okay, in very concrete, specific terms. So again, speaking to start, we're a membership organization with more than 125 members. They range from small block clubs to larger nonprofits like Focus Hope to academic institutions. These are all partners that we engage in various ways. So again, it couldn't possibly be that we could touch all of the entities that you mentioned just through this team or even with our small organization. To start with that, part of it is a lot of the larger meetings. You know, there are various ways that you have to recognize tapping people. Some people want to come out to a large meeting, people that have come here. They're surveying. Some people want it to just be surveyed. We know that there are a number of meetings that are already happening across Detroit, and that's the other pieces. We don't need to recreate the wheel in some, so you're already having, there are calendars of existing meetings that we need to tap and get information to, where we can either have interactive things that people can do, we can have surveys that people can do. We can utilize the internet, but we know that in Detroit, everyone doesn't have access. There are libraries, there are schools. We have cultural institutions that are also members. There are artists. We sit on a number of different task forces. There's a design center. Detroit is now a city of design. There's a ton of events happening with that. So part of it would be the collecting of all of the existing calendars, scheduling different meetings, reaching out to other partners, creating different tools, surveying tools, tools for youth, tools that speak across the generations. So that's just a start, but also part of it too is kind of central to us is that we listen to how people tell us they like to be engaged. We have always utilized in our engagement an advisory council, and it's made up of local stakeholders, already recognized leaders who already have constituencies, neighbors, residents, meetings that they tap into, but they also tell us how best to engage people. When we worked in Brightmoor, they told us, we have a lot of land here. We like to have barbecues. We're going to hold a series of barbecues, and that's how we're going to engage people and get them to come out and have them respond to something. So a lot of it is going to also be listening. Because the one thing we found out too is, one, you can't hold a meeting, at 10 o'clock in the morning for people, and then people don't come out. If you're not speaking and trying to tap people how they tell you they can best be reached, then it's not going to be effective. So I hope that gives you a little bit more of the specifics.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to also...
Can I just touch on that for a second? Because I just think there's just another component to this, is that we as designers need to bring a vision and a poetry and a subject matter for people to respond to and incorporate all this kind of stuff. At the end of the day, we have to provide something, an armature, let's say, that everybody can buy into that's transforming this district, and it has the flexibility over time to change and mutate itself. But there needs to be enough strength for that initial idea to coalesce this district and bring these people together. So.
Yeah, I mean, that to Maurice's analogy, that's the dinner. He set the table, but you all are bringing the meal. Right. And that has to be the other part of the iteration. The listening is one side, but really understanding the structure more, what you just described, how you present the concepts, so the community can give you some feedback. Have you got it right? Did you not? Walking them through scenarios. And I'd be interested in understanding how you use that tool beyond the presentation mode to actually, again, engage community around how they see themselves in your work. I mean, how do you all approach that?
So you had kind of reminded us this is a competition, although I didn't need reminding. I think, because we are on stage, so. I think, also to be very frank, to say there is a difference between a community process that we do as part of a larger kind of schematic design development, and construction document community process versus something that's a competition where, in general, Jamie and I, we don't do competitions, but we have a 2 or 3 month period, as I understand, or a couple months between now and if we were fortunate enough to move to the next phase. But it would have to be a different type of community engagement. And then, in my mind, what I imagine is that it would give us kind of a piece of what we really need to know. And then if we're fortunate enough to actually work on the project, then we would propose a more expanded community process that would go through all phases of design. So it would, it never ends, right? It just,
We have time for one more question from the audience. She's been standing here
Kara
for
had a
quite some
question as
time.
well.
Yeah, and we can fit it in. Let's get this one in, please.
Hi everyone, my name is Alice Agadima. I'm currently at the Detroit Historical Museum, and outside of that, I'm completely invested in mobility and transportation, and I wanted to know how do you expect to like pretty much speak with or cooperate with other people that's in untapped, underserved areas as far as mobility, because I know you only spoke about like cycling, but you have other people in other areas that just may not be able to get to with this cultural hub. So how do you intend to pretty much connect outside communities that's not a part of like Focus Hope or your actual entity that's, you know, they want to have access but they really just don't know how to? Or even though those students or children that want to get to know these places or want to just engage, how do you expect to get them here? Or how do you expect to take this and put it in their neighborhoods?
That's a great question. I'm going to let Liz answer this question, but I think part of our process is we can't promise that we're going to fix your transportation problem, but we want to know about it. And that's what we do as designers, is we find out, like, I don't know if you were here when I talked about the missing teeth or the disconnected bike paths. Sometimes when you draw a map and you show how obvious it is to connect one thing to the other. And so for us, that's why we showed the kind of 3-county area, is that we would look at a broader view to say who's the larger constituency that you want to draw in, and where are the weaknesses in those connections. And so that would be part of that dialogue. But
I do also think it's about the whole issue of transparency and people feeling welcome that they can come, because they'll find a way if they know that there's something here that they want and they want to be here. And I think when we talk about, you know, the community process and how do we do it in this competition, we talked about that up front, is what are you going to do, what are we going to do? And I think that the first thing we do if we're selected is sit down with you and go, how do we organize this for these 3 teams in a way that makes sense for the community and doesn't overburden them, and makes sense for the teams to make sure that we're all getting that nugget of information that we need for this competition, and then that will go on as you go to implement. But there's no way in the short period of this competition that you can do the full-blown process. So it's how do we work with you to get a process that we know will give us what we think is the key information and what you think is the key information, so that we can respond to that as we bring these original ideas to the table.
I have just one quick question. There's been all this wonderful talk about how you would engage the larger community about activating the spaces primarily outside of these cultural institutions. But it's a fantastic collection of top-notch institutions. And how do you propose engaging the people inside the museums, like the staff who work at the museums, the institution, all the various institutions? Because as we know, in the institutions, yes, we get people in, but we would all like to have more people come in the door. We hear repeatedly that many people feel like they don't belong in the space. It's not familiar to them. It's not part of their everyday life. So how can we use this project to really expand it like 150%, not just what's happening outside, but inside the institution?
Let me just speak to that. I think that I think in the back of all your minds, you've sort of seen some of these same issues that, you know, we see certainly here. Just the formality of, if you take the Woodward side here, the formality of the entry and its removal from the street, disengagement from activity on the street. There's certainly a way to significantly change the notion of entry on that side, and in fact have some elements that are available through all seasons that show activity on the street. I mean, dining, maybe temporary exhibitions, shared exhibitions between the museums, some way to get partial activity out onto that main street. But I think even more importantly is this back street on John R., where, you know, the most recent addition has been basically a fortress. And like how does this open up in that direction, to the east, and try to get some of these member organizations, particularly the Scarab Club, which, is the most diminutive of the partners, but in a way is maybe one of the more critical partners because it's this source point in a way at a very critical place. But there's no question you have to move things out so people feel that they can have that boundary threshold that's not threatening and not formal, but you can come in, whatever you wish to do. It could be partial exhibitions or reading material or group tours that go in there, and then you go into the museum. But there's something that has to thread through that exterior environment into the interior environment, and it has to be, something that really makes people feel like you move through these buildings, in a much more simpler, more comprehensive way. So it's programming, it's all those things, but architecture is key.
So we have about 6 minutes left total now.
I'd love to just continue.
Great.
I think we could do closing remarks, but I think it's more important for us to be answering the questions. There's another team member that's not here today who's QCM, and I think that they also will be an important partner. They've talked to us about how the digital component is very important in terms of kind of connecting different institutions together. We have talked to them on other projects, and they are instrumental. And Jamie, you were talking about opening things up perceptually to the body, but also opening things up in the digital world so that people can know what's going on. You had mentioned that, and then they can also kind of engage in that kind of ether world. So I think there are multiple ways that can be done, but really it's through design that we would be looking to kind of try to break down some barriers and make things more accessible. Right now, the Northeastern project that I showed, we basically raised that central grade by 5 feet. That's why all the paths are curved. So those forms, so that we could get that grading. It's very technical, but it allowed for all 3 of these kind of very monumental buildings to reduce the number of stairs that they have by half. So what's like very similar to DIA is that you go there, and I mean, to my eye level, I don't know if it's to your eye level, but I see stairs, and right. And so, I think that there's a way in which we would really want to, we could play with grades to really kind of make things more accessible and do subtle things like that as well. I know you wanted to.
Just briefly to your point, your question really identified a particular population when you spoke of the people who are working inside these institutions. And you're right, that is a point where we would start because they hold a lot of necessary data. They can tell you, like you said, their feelings also about the inner workings, what they've observed, and so they would also be engaged in certain ways that would work for them, if it's through focus group conversations, interviews, ways that they would make them feel comfortable, be very candid and open, but it's extremely vital to have that input in the process.
Are there any other questions?
Use a word that I think a lot as museum director, which is Eurocentric. The space.
Oh, I only used it once.
No, I think about it. I think about it every day, especially because we're trying to engage different communities, and we want to bring a sense of equity in the space, not only in the museum but across what we call the town square or the plaza, and the buildings, the space, how relate to each other, the dialogue that exists is Eurocentric, and the perception that is in the community is also that this space is Eurocentric. And as I mentioned, the communities that we want to engage aren't necessarily Eurocentric. So the question is very simple. How confident are you that your work in this space could help us change the perception of Eurocentricity?
I feel like I'm at the doctor's office where they say, like, what's your pain level? It's like 1 or 10. But no, so I think that, we're beginning this process, but as we said earlier, identifying what the problem is And it was clear to us the first time we walked on the site. I think that the landscape is the problem right now. And that's great news for you guys because it's a lawn. It's not like, and then you have this big fountain that blocks the front entrance. You don't have a clear articulation of vehicles and pedestrians, and I think you need to kind of bias the pedestrian at that grand entrance. And so that would be the big question we would ask. I don't have an answer for it today, but how do you take this thing that was all about looking and feeling monumental, and I think in some ways feeling like grand, right, and formal, into an age where things are informal. People meet each other in many different ways, and there are lots of groups of people that have a voice now that they didn't have when these buildings were built, including me. And so I think, you know, we brought this diverse team together to try to figure out what does that mean, you know, and how does that work. We don't have the answer now, but I feel confident that through the process that Jamie and I have done for decades, that we're really interested in this question. We're really interested in helping you figure it out.
Can I just add to that a bit? Like, you used the word town square, and I know that was in all of your sort of publications. We're actually thinking of this more as a commons, and I think it's a better terminology to achieve the goals hereafter. Town square, again, is a reinforcement of this hierarchy that is certainly Eurocentric and not in hierarchy in terms of churches, administrative buildings, all of these things, framing a space which would never feel as public as a commons. And I'm referring more to a commons being how land is used in New England, where everybody could pasture their cattle on that property and everybody shares that land. So I think there's just some issues with just terminology in some ways. I think it changed people's perception.
Okay, that's been 45 minutes. We are done for the day. Please join me in thanking Jamie and Mikyoung.
Thank you so much.
Sarita,